Welcome back to my channel. My name is Katie Edwards Campbell with the Katie Campbell Network, and today I just wanted to talk about the differences between the EIDL loan and the PPP loan. So I've been getting many questions, should I take one over the other? Some people do a mix of both, but the one thing I can say is only take the funds if you really need it. And you may want to pay attention to what the differences are, because that determines how you can use the funds, right? So let's start right away with the main differences. So the EIDL loan, that's the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. It kind of existed before the CARES Act, but it was, mainly when businesses went through a disaster, they would go ahead and apply with the SBA for that loan. So now these loans are repositioned to businesses that have been impacted by the pandemic. So first up, you would go ahead and submit your application through SBA, right? For eligibility, under 500 employees, must be a small business, sole proprietor, a cooperative. It includes agricultural cooperatives, employee stock ownership plan, tribal small business, aquaculture and nursery business. So, you have the greenhouses, or if you farm raise fish, 501c, D or E nonprofits, state-based private nonprofit, and faith-based organizations, businesses under SBA size standards, right? Working capital, which includes fixed debts, rent, utilities, etc. So now they want to talk about what the approved uses are, right? So it says working capital, which includes fixed debts. So we're talking about your rent, your utilities, etc. Payroll, accounts payable, some bills that could have been paid had the disaster not occurred. What are the terms? The interest rate is 3.75%. For everyone, and then I believe it's like 2.75% if it's a nonprofit, and the terms are up to 30 years, right? And payments begin in 12 months. So even though you sign your loan documents now, they give you a 12-month deferral. Obviously, interest is going to grow on it in the time it's dormant. So if you would want to make payments to, kind of lessen the burden of the interest that's growing during that 12 months, then you should go ahead and do so, right? Now, for the PPP loan, you have to contact your lender. You are not applying through the SBA, right? So this is offered by your bank or other financial institutions that are offering the PPP program. Like some people were signing up through Fundera, just different places, right? You should have under 500 employers, and it's small business, 501c3 nonprofit, 501c19 veterans organization, 31b2c tribal business, sole proprietorship, self-employed, independent contractor, faith-based organizations, right? And then, so the approved uses, so initially when it was signed into order, they had 8 weeks of payroll costs with fixed expenses as the rent, utilities, and interest on debts. And then the terms were, it was forgivable if used for 75% of payroll costs and 25% for rent, utilities, interest costs if not forgiven, 1% interest for 2 years, and in 6 months. So payments would begin in 6 months if it's not forgiven. Well, here's the thing. So recently, the president went ahead and he kind of passed an order that kind of relaxed the rules. So this is the new rules that came out. So instead of the 75-25% split, for the spending of the funds from the PPP loan on payroll, it now becomes a 60-40 split. So before it was 75% payroll, 25% rent, utilities, interest costs. So now that has changed to a 60-40 split. So it's 60% should be allotted to payroll costs, and then 40% to everything else like the rent, utilities, interest costs. Please pay attention to what they're saying you can spend it on, because it's a very thin line. Obviously, we do not only run businesses on rent, utilities, and interest costs. We have inventory. There are also other small necessities that come along with certain businesses. And so you have to pay attention to where it's saying it's not allowed. So you want to be careful that you don't get the loan called because you're not following the rules, right? So some of the other things that have changed for the PPP loan is they've extended the time to use the funds from the 8 weeks to 24 weeks. So 24 weeks would take you through the end of 2020. So part of the issue was, okay, from the date you got the funds for the PPP loan, you had to spend it within 8 weeks, right? And within that 8 weeks, you had to do the 75-25% split. Obviously, we were all like locked down. Most states were locked down. We were quarantined. There was no way, apart from if like an employee owed employees back wages, there was no way like they would be able to spend that funds because they weren't in operation. The workers weren't working yet. So it would have been hard for them to not like void the terms of the loan and have it become unforgivable, right? Hear the sirens, something's going on out there. But they went ahead and changed that. So from the date of the loan, you had 24 weeks within which to spend the loan, and now instead of the 75-25, you now would have the opportunity to spend it 60-40, with 60 to payroll and 40 to your rent and other utilities and interest costs, which it allows for, right? They also pushed back the deadline by when employers had to rehire their workers. Now, everyone knows that with the unemployment, given that extra amount of money per week, it becomes almost impossible for folks to say, I'm just gonna come off unemployment and go back to my job where I was making way less, because it becomes an issue for them. They cannot meet their needs because so many things have become due and payable due to them not working. So a lot of times you would find employers are not able to rehire their workers. And so with some states that were still closed, it was becoming very hard for them to meet this June 30 deadline to rehire their workers, because obviously if they did not meet this requirement, the loan would not be forgivable. So with the relaxed rules, they are able to push it until December 31st, 2020, and then you can still go ahead and apply for forgiveness after the first 8 weeks, right? So still go ahead, try to rehire your workers if possible. You now have an extended period until December 31st, 2020. Now, they also had to make other requirements because, like I cited before, if someone is unable to come back to work because different circumstances, they either had to move, people lost their house, they got split up, they took another offer because they weren't working and they had to seek for work elsewhere. They also had to relax the rules for employers rehiring workers. So what it comes down to is the new law states that it's going to extend the rehiring date to December 31st, 2020. And second, it will add exceptions for reduced headcount. So it states that if a business can still receive forgiveness on payroll amounts if it is unable to rehire an individual who was an employee of the recipient on or before February 15, 2020, right? is able to demonstrate an inability to hire similarly qualified employees on or before December 31st, 2020, is able to demonstrate an inability to return to the same level of business activity as such business was operating at prior to February 15, 2020. So that just, who really knows what inability to rehire looks like? We don't really know. They also extended the repayment term from 2 years to 5 years, because if your loan is unforgivable, it will become, eligible for repayment, and the interest is still at 1%. So the Treasury guidelines will still govern the SBA loan audits. So you want to be absolutely positively clear on how you can spend your funds, because they are going to look at it, right? Because the PPP loans came out as a result of the pandemic, and it is to cover specific expenses. So that would be one of your major differences between the EIDL loan and the PPP. PPP, you got to be walking the ultimate straight and narrow, because we're talking about Treasury oversight here. EIDL loan, it was already in existence. Of course, SBA is going to do their due diligence. Do not slack up on that. Please read through their documents on what the funds can be used for, okay? So the very difference is you have a little bit more room of what you can spend your funds on. So they talk about accounts payable, some bills that could have been paid had the disaster not occurred. So that could probably be a little software fees that you have, but it existed prior to the pandemic, yes? We're not talking about stuff that would come through where you set it up after the pandemic and now you have a charge. So you got to pay attention to that. So I think I'm going to dedicate another video to talking about the use of the EIDL loan and the PPP loan, just because it's important that you understand. So I do hope what you got from this video today is that EIDL, it's a little bit more lax on what you can spend on, and PPP, it's to the hilt. They tell you bam, 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 exactly what you should be spending the funds on. All right, so thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.